The morning sun stretched across the rolling plains of western Texas, painting the endless grass in shades of gold. Horses grazed peacefully behind long wooden fences, while ranch hands prepared for another day of hard work. Among them was Ethan Walker, a quiet cowboy in his early 30s. Unlike the others, Ethan never boasted about his skills or complained about long hours. He simply worked. For 5 years, Ethan had given everything to Blackstone Ranch, the largest cattle ranch in the county. He repaired broken fences before sunrise, calmed frightened horses during storms, and stayed awake through freezing nights protecting newborn calves. The ranch wasn't just his job, it had become his home. The owner, Charles Blackstone, was the richest rancher for 100 miles. His expensive suits, polished boots, and growing fortune had earned him respect, but they had also filled him with pride. Charles believed every success on the ranch came from his leadership alone. One autumn morning, Charles announced the arrival of a wealthy investor from the east. "Everything must look perfect," he ordered. "One mistake today could cost this ranch a fortune." The workers nodded nervously. As preparations began, Ethan noticed smoke rising from a distant pasture. Riding toward it, he discovered lightning had struck an old storage shed during the night. The dry wood had begun to smolder, and strong winds threatened to spread the fire toward the cattle. Without waiting for permission, Ethan rallied a few ranch hands. They formed a bucket line from the nearby creek and worked relentlessly until the fire was completely out. Their clothes were soaked, their hands blistered, but hundreds of cattle had been saved. By the time Ethan returned to the main ranch house, the investor's visit had already begun. Charles stood waiting on the porch, his face burning with anger. "Where were you?" he demanded. Ethan removed his dusty hat. "There was a fire in the south pasture. We had to stop it before." "I didn't ask for excuses." Charles interrupted loudly, making sure everyone could hear. "You abandoned your post on the most important day this ranch has ever had." Several workers exchanged uneasy glances. They knew Ethan had saved the ranch from disaster, but no one dared challenge their employer. "The fire would have destroyed the herd," Ethan explained calmly. Charles laughed bitterly. "Do you expect me to believe that? You're nothing more than a cowboy who thinks he knows better than his boss." The wealthy investor watched the confrontation in silence. Charles pulled a folded envelope from his coat. "You're fired." The words hit like a gunshot. The ranch fell silent. One by one, the workers lowered their eyes. Some wanted to speak, but fear held them back. Ethan slowly accepted the envelope containing his final wages. His weathered hands trembled, not with anger, but disappointment. He had devoted years of loyalty to this place. Years that could be erased in a single minute. Looking across the ranch one last time, Ethan quietly said, "I hope one day you learn the difference between obedience and doing what's right." Without another word, he saddled his old horse, Ranger. As he rode away beneath the setting sun, none of the men watching from the ranch realized they were witnessing the biggest mistake Charles Blackstone would ever make. 3 days later, everything Charles believed about power, loyalty, and success would be turned upside down by a truth no one saw coming. 3 days after Ethan Walker left Blackstone Ranch, the peaceful routine Charles Blackstone took pride in began to fall apart. It started before sunrise. Nearly 200 cattle broke through a section of fencing on the northern pasture and scattered across the open prairie. The ranch hands rushed after them, but many had no idea where the hidden crossings or narrow canyons were. Ethan had always known every inch of the land. Without him, the roundup took nearly the entire day, and several valuable cattle were lost. Charles blamed the workers. "You're all becoming lazy," he shouted. No one answered. Deep down, every man knew the truth. Ethan had quietly held the ranch together for years. He had fixed problems before anyone noticed them, leaving Charles to believe everything simply ran perfectly. The next morning brought another disaster. One of the ranch's strongest stallions refused to leave its stable. The horse kicked at anyone who came near. Finally, old Jacob, the ranch's oldest worker, sighed. Only Ethan could calm thunder. Charles frowned. Nonsense. It's just a horse. He stepped into the stable himself. Within seconds, Thunder reared onto its hind legs, sending Charles crashing into a pile of hay. His expensive jacket tore across the shoulder, and his pride suffered an even deeper wound. The workers rushed to help him. For the first time, Charles saw something in their eyes that disturbed him. Not fear. Pity. That evening, Jacob quietly approached Charles carrying a worn leather journal. "I think it's time you read this." "What is it?" "Ethan's maintenance log." Charles opened the notebook. Every page was filled with careful handwriting. Broken wells repaired before they collapsed. Diseased cattle treated before infection spread. Predators tracked away from newborn calves. Weak fences strengthened after every storm. Hidden water sources mapped during droughts. Even the storage shed that had caught fire 3 days earlier had been marked weeks before. Needs replacing before lightning season, Ethan had written. Charles stopped turning pages. His hands slowly tightened around the journal. He remembered ignoring Ethan's request to replace that old building. "It can wait," Charles had said. Now the truth felt heavier than the leather book itself. For years, Ethan had protected the ranch from disasters Charles never even knew existed. Yet Charles had called him irresponsible. Late that night, unable to sleep, Charles wandered into the ranch office. There he found Margaret, the elderly bookkeeper, organizing old records. Without looking up, she quietly asked, "Do you know why Ethan came to work here?" Charles shook his head. Margaret opened an old wooden drawer and handed him a faded newspaper clipping. The headline read, "Local ranch owner dies saving neighbor's son during flash flood." Charles stared at the photograph. The man smiling beside a young Ethan looked strangely familiar. Then realization struck him like lightning. His knees nearly gave way. The man in the photograph was Samuel Walker, the cowboy's father. Charles remembered the flood from 20 years earlier. As a reckless teenager, he had ignored warnings and ridden into a swollen river. His horse had been swept away. Samuel Walker had jumped into the raging water without hesitation. He pulled Charles to safety. But Samuel never made it back to shore. Charles had lived. Ethan had grown up without a father. Margaret's voice broke the silence. "Your family offered compensation after the funeral." Charles swallowed hard. "I remember." Ethan refused every penny. Charles looked up. He only asked for one thing. What? A chance to earn an honest living, on the ranch his father died protecting. Charles felt the room spin. The loyal cowboy he had humiliated before everyone wasn't just another employee. He was the son of the man who had sacrificed his life to save Charles. For the first time in many years, the proud ranch owner lowered his head. His eyes filled with tears. And in a trembling voice, he whispered words no one had ever heard him say before. "I've made the greatest mistake of my life." Before sunrise the next morning, Charles Blackstone saddled his fastest horse. For the first time in decades, he left Blackstone Ranch without giving a single order. Instead, he carried only Ethan's worn leather journal and the heavy weight of regret. For 2 days, Charles searched every nearby ranch, trading post, church, and small frontier town. "Have you seen Ethan Walker?" he asked everyone. Most people simply nodded. Quiet fellow. Hard worker. Always willing to help. Not one person had a bad word to say about him. Each answer made Charles feel smaller. Late on the second afternoon, an elderly blacksmith pointed toward a narrow valley. "You'll find him near Willow Creek." Charles rode as fast as his exhausted horse could carry him. When he reached the valley, he expected to find Ethan living alone. Instead, he froze. A group of children laughed as they chased chickens across a small piece of land. An elderly widow stirred a pot over an outdoor fire. A disabled Civil War veteran repaired a wooden wagon. And at the center of it all stood Ethan, building a modest one-room schoolhouse with his own hands. Charles stared in disbelief. "You bought a ranch?" Ethan smiled gently. "No. This land was abandoned. The county let us use it." Charles looked around. "Who are these people?" "People everyone else forgot." The widow had lost her farm. The veteran had nowhere to go. 3 orphaned siblings had been sleeping in an old barn. Ethan had spent every dollar he had ever saved to give them food, shelter, and hope. Charles suddenly realized something. The final paycheck he had thrown at Ethan had become the first payment for a new beginning. Ashamed, Charles removed his hat. "Ethan. I came to apologize." Silence filled the valley. The children stopped playing. Even the wind seemed to stand still. "I judged you without listening." Charles's voice trembled. "I insulted the son of the man who gave his life to save mine." Tears filled his eyes. "I don't deserve your forgiveness." Slowly, Charles held out the keys to Blackstone Ranch. "Take everything. The ranch. The cattle. My house. It's yours. I owe it all to your father." The valley remained silent. Then Ethan did something no one expected. He gently pushed the keys back into Charles's hand. "I don't want your ranch." Charles looked up, confused. "I never stayed because I wanted land. I stayed because my father believed a good man could change. And I wanted to believe he was right." Charles couldn't speak. Ethan smiled. "If I took everything from you, you would only lose a ranch. But if you become the man my father believed you could be, you'll save far more lives than mine." Those words struck deeper than any bullet. Charles broke down in tears. For the first time since childhood, the proud ranch owner wept without shame. Months passed. Blackstone Ranch changed completely. Workers received fair wages. Widows were given free grazing land. Orphans were offered apprenticeships. Every winter, food and blankets were delivered to struggling families across the county. But the greatest surprise came one spring morning. A government official arrived carrying a sealed document. He announced that Samuel Walker had secretly owned a large section of land bordering Blackstone Ranch, land everyone believed had been abandoned after his death. Because Samuel had never updated his legal papers, the property had remained untouched for over 20 years. The deed legally belonged to his only son, Ethan Walker. It wasn't just a few acres. It was one of the largest and most fertile ranches in the entire county. Charles stood speechless. He had spent years believing he was the richest ranch owner in Texas. The cowboy he had fired. The man he had humiliated in front of everyone. Had unknowingly been wealthier than him all along. Ethan looked at the deed, then smiled. He folded it carefully and turned toward the children playing outside the little schoolhouse. "This land," he said softly, "will never make one man rich. It will give hundreds of families a future." And in that moment, Charles finally understood the lesson Samuel Walker had died trying to teach the world. A person's true wealth is never measured by the land they own, but by the lives they choose to lift.